Originally today's small game that code was meant to be a mere side activity in this 2007 gaming collection The Orange Box, which highest selling point was arguably its second independent expansion to the first-person shooter juggernaut Half-Life 2. However, this game turned out to be its most highly acclaimed and memed product, and it also inspired a brand new first-person puzzle subgenre. This is Portal. As is typical for games in developer/publisher from Valve's catalog, the credits don't state what specific jobs people did for the project. So I have to use the information the Wikipedia article gave me and hope to God whatever sources it used are correct. The presumed lead designer is Kim Swift, whose other design works include Left 4 Dead games, Quantum Conundrum and Wavetale among others, and whose student production Nabacular Drop about the legless princess creating portals to move from 2 years prior worked as an inspiration for Valve higher-ups to ask her to do the same for their firm, but more polished and sci-fi. One day the Valve Pigsoft of my life will come to ask me to do a better version of Usina's adventure. Anyway, the writers are Chet Falisek, who also provided stuff for Left 4 Dead and Counter-Strike Global Offensive, and Eric Wolpa, who before this and other Valve projects provided co-writing for Psychonauts. So our story starts by not revealing itself for a while. First, we only have our player character Sela waking up in a small chamber with no other human inside. Soon, however, the all-controlling artificial intelligence genetic lifeform and disk operating system, or GLaDOS for short, played by opera star Ellen McLean, makes her jovially unhinged presence known. She informs that Cell is in the laboratories of tech company Aperture Science, and that she must perform 19 test men to experiment on the revolutionary invention Portal Gun. Over the years, GLaDOS has been elevated into the pantheon of great video game villains, and for good reasons. Her thinly veiled insinuations of the science faculties, and by association her own crass lack of ethics, cold insults aimed on the test subjects, and hints that something far more sinister is waiting at the end of the line, contribute in solidifying her as dangerously mad and slightly frightening entity.
Well done, Android. The Enrichment Center once again reminds you that Android Hell is a real place where you will be sent at the first sign of defiance.
Only slightly, because her demented yet funny banter makes this series more of a dark comedy instead of outright horror. That part is more taking care of the sterile, derelict environments and equally derelict lo-fi ambience music, and this all sounds and looks good even 16 years later. What with Cell's rough character model notwithstanding, but in her defense, I probably wouldn't look any better after waking up from coma. Cell herself doesn't indeed say anything during this whole adventure, and those who have watched my videos for longer know that I'm not fond of silent protagonists. However, in this case, it's understandable, because if she was too talkative, then it would diminish the game's sense of isolation. Besides, there are hints toward an interpretation that she can speak but chooses not to just out of spite, which is admittedly funny. But yeah, that Portal Gun. The idea is to solve these test chambers by using one blue and one orange portal for traversing. At first the gun only has the blue option, and the orange add-on is gotten in about the first third point of the game, which in retrospective I felt made the stuff before that an overstretched tutorial. But in fairness, I have completed Portal several times, so watching it from a noob's perspective is harder. Even if it takes some time for it to get to the meat of the things, the game excels in its puzzle design, giving relative freedom to solve your problems with seemingly simple tools, and great responsive physics make the process smooth. Once spot portals are available, the game can still vary its formula with all sorts of additions, like navigating through hostile turrets and taking care of this inanimate object gamers get crazy attached to for some reason. Overall, Portal is a tight package that contains innovative mechanics, minimal yet intriguing story with excellent dialogue writing, ending on the suspenseful and satisfying last third. Stuff before that is stellar too, even if the first third feels basic when you don't have the full skill set yet. Pity that the whole experience is so short.
Even back when this game was brand new, I completed it in one 3-hour sitting, and for this playthrough it took me a little over half of that. Though if you really need to squeeze more out of this, there are harder remixes for the last 6 test chambers. Not that lack of content is that big of a deal, because Portal 2, baby!
Released in 2011, the sequel expanded its predecessor's scope by doubling/tripling the single-player campaign's length and adding a whole slew of new mechanics and expanded lore. At this point, Miss Swift had left Valve, so as the new director we had Joshua Weyer, who has been a Valve regular since Half-Life Opposing Force, and as the new writer addition there's former Cracked magazine editor Jay Pinkerton, who outside of Valve properties has spent something called Trover Saves the Universe. I need to spoil some things from the first game to explain what's going on in this one, but to give things vague enough, Cell and GLaDOS work out their differences through violence, and some moments after that confrontation she wakes up in this motel room, and then she wakes up after far more moments. Yet she looks surprisingly healthy considering the circumstances. At least this Motormouth AI core Wheatley, played by TV star Stephen Merchant, tries really hard to lighten up the mood.
Do you understand what I'm saying? At all? Does any of this make any sense? Just tell me, just say yes. Okay, what you're doing there is jumping. You just jumped. But never mind, say apple. Apple. Okay, you know what? That's close enough. Just hold tight.
As you may surmise from that clip, this game leans even heavier towards humor, and there has been debates on which one of these games has the better atmosphere. I don't mind it either way, because this game still has horror traces, especially in the beginning when the entire facility has been taken over by nature, and while the environments look sleeker, they are still impressive. And in case you're wondering how all the facilities, assets and entire look changed during the time period between two games, well, it's one of those "what do you mean? They have always looked like this" cases.
Thus our hero travels through the vegetation while the base mechanics are iterated, though thankfully the game's tutorial elements are better integrated into the gameplay. This is true even when more mechanics are added, like throwing platforms, laser bridges and various gels of bouncing and speeding versions, because they are not all introduced in a row and are simple enough to understand that their functionalities don't cause confusion when several of them are mixed together. Reviewers, however, have mixed views on the difficulty, some saying the game is too easy because surfaces where portals can be put on are quite obvious. I partially agree with them, but how I remember it, those cases aren't too numerous and are more often in the beginning of each of the game's 4 acts that are divided to 10 chapters. In other words, instead of the steady difficulty rise of the original, the sequel's challenges are more valleys and peaks, partially by necessity due to having to introduce new mechanics every so often.
I have completed the game for like 2 times already, but even then I managed to find puzzles that required more complex thinking patterns. Besides, the first game had its own share of that, especially in the test chamber that introduced turrets, but admittedly not to the extent of this game. But why is Cell making all these tests, you may now ask? Because based on my vague insinuations, GLaDOS has been in scrap metal for a while now. Well, wouldn't you know it, that idiot Spear accidentally resurrected her. Whoops.
Look, we both said a lot of things that you're going to regret. But I think we can put our differences behind us. For science. You monster.
Don't worry, he's fine. As intimidating as GLaDOS' reintroduction to the plot was, I've never liked how this game's writing diminishes her threat factor in such a drastic way.
While continuing to put Shell through tests and getting the facility back to operational, GLaDOS also berates our unfortunate hero, though this time her insults are on much more personal level. Also her insults are pettier, which makes her sound less like someone wanting revenge on someone who tore her to pieces and threw every piece into a fire, and more like a bratty child who lost a board game match.
That jumpsuit you're wearing looks stupid. That's not me talking. It's right here in your file. On other people it looks fine, but right here a scientist has noted that on you it looks stupid.
GLaDOS, you're talking to a woman who goes full mute just to spite her captor. You honestly think something like that is going to affect her? I mean, there are a few nastier ones, but even them she doesn't fully commit to their cruelty. This is where Cell being silent also hurts GLaDOS's intimidation status, because the effectiveness of a villain is determined by how people around them react to their words or actions. So in this case it's all dependent on how the player feels about GLaDOS, and personally I find her immature nagging annoying.
That being said, the writing is still funny, and even if the sequel has lost much of the first game's captivating creepiness, it's not worse for it, just different. And it especially shines when, after the halfway, we get to see old Aperture Science testing grounds, which are accompanied by hilariously loony recordings from the company founder Cave Johnson, played by film star J.K. Simmons.
Science isn't about why, it's about why not. Why is so much of our science dangerous? Why not marry safe science if you love it so much? In fact, why not invent a special safety door that won't hit you on the butt on the way out, because you are fired? Now you test subject, you're doing fine.
Besides, there are some neat twists and revelations, so I don't mind the writing's weaker aspects that much. Normally I would end things here, but Portal 2 has a multiplayer campaign that had equal amounts of promotional material dedicated towards it. I have been a single player dude through my whole life, but since my currently only Steam friend, namely my logo artist Tony Yefremov, also known as Dango Yaba Yefu in streaming circles, has the game as well, so let's briefly talk about our joint adventure.
The story continues right after the end of the single-player campaign, and not to spoil too much, but GLaDOS came to the conclusion that testing with humans is too much of a hassle, so she has two robots to do the job instead, namely Atlas and Peabody, from which I happen to play the latter. Well, story is in quotation marks because it's barely there. Once in a blue moon our computer overlaid hints to searching for something, but what this something is won't be revealed until much later. At least GLaDOS has gotten some of her threat flavor back by tuning up the sadism gears. Anyway, the campaign consists of 4 testing segments that all have 6 to 8 tests each, plus another one added in the free downloadable expansion Peer Review. As the new additions to the gameplay, there are several command actions to indicate stuff like where you wish your partner to put their portals or count down to an action, but if you already know each other and have a way to communicate via words, then these commands become entirely useless. The look there command I use the most, but even that can be circumvented with a button that shows your partner's point of view. Due to the repetitive structure of the narrative and lack of any mood-building music during tests, one might think that multiplayer shenanigans would become tedious after a while, but the presence of another human does elevate it all, not to mention more complex puzzles caused by 4 portals. Turns out we both have tendency to think too complicated, so we occasionally had to bang our heads quite literally.
Au. 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 Au.
Ja sittenhän se hulluuden määritelmä yrittää monta asiaa. Yhtä asiaa monta kertaa odottaa eri lopputulosta. But overall it was entertaining time and interesting to experience a multiplayer where I could communicate with an actual human for the first time.
At the time of filming this, me and Yefu haven't completed the last test segments yet, though I did accidentally spoil the endings for myself, and I guess it could lead to something amusing, maybe. But yeah, anyway, Portal 2 is a masterpiece. And so is the first game to a lesser extent.
Their combined influence helped to revolutionize the gaming hemisphere by showing that there is a demand for calmer shooter experiences that thrust on brains over brawl. They both play smoothly with responsive physics and logical puzzles, and graphical showcasing is timeless whenever it's the industrial corrosion of the first or the sleek hue of the second. The duology story is competently written, but whenever you like the way how it's told depends on what's your tolerance towards word-heavy quirkiness. And personally, aside from causing villain decay to GLaDOS, I'm welcoming it for creating a separate identity from the other well-known Valve property Half-Life. Definitely play them if you have a chance. What comes to first-person puzzlers, they are among the best representation of the genre that in my opinion has been surpassed only once. that's a story for some other time.
Since then there has been some tech demo spin-offs, and apparently Portal had a significant presence in a Crisis crossover game LEGO Dimensions, but that hasn't been enough for the most diehard of fans who still wish that one day the third Portal game would manifest. I'm not sure about that myself. They did wrap up Cell's story rather nicely. And besides, the writers wrote themselves into a corner with the whole "it has been probably hundreds of years after the first game, so everyone Cell has ever known are probably dead" thing. But Valve employees, both current and former, have expressed some interest towards a third game. So perhaps one day we shall see if they truly manage to once again create something completely revolutionary, or if they finally settle for good enough.